We've been undertaking what we call the Congo Language Documentation Project with the U of I. Been doing that in association with several research assistants. Claudia Crespo is one of them. We receive funding for various agencies on campus. We have short-term objectives such as recording and archiving the sounds of Congo, producing a complete phonological grammar of the language that is its sound system, and producing an online multimedia dictionary of Congo. So our longer term objectives are to write a comprehensive Congo grammar along with other native speaking linguists like Wala Mateo, and to perform more field work in various villages in early Toronto. Lots of work has already been done, I should say, in Guatemala by various organizations interested in the languages. So just to give you a little bit of an idea, as I said before, about some of the interesting phonetics of the language, it has a large set of what are called ejectives, sounds like that are produced with a sort of airstream mechanism that's much different than the languages that a lot of us are familiar with. Really interesting sound is the implosive stop. It actually occurs in the word "al." It's done by actually drawing air into your vocal tract rather than expelling it, which is something we're not really familiar with in English. And uvulars sounds like and also occur. The first letter in the word "vowel" is actually one of the rarest sounds in human language. It's what's called voiceless implosive. I was able to document that for the first time by measuring the airflow as speakers produce this sound. It's produced by drawing in air at the same time you're lowering the larynx and not vibrating the vocal folds at all, so something like blah. But people, you can get away with saying things like blah, and nobody will worry too much. And it has 3 sibilant fricatives, which is sort of unusual. So a couple of words, I'll just produce them for you here because I don't have permission to play the voice of the speaker to you. Things like chane, so the ch and ch are 2 different sounds. If you can't hear the difference, well, it's something you have to learn in order to produce the language well. Klashkan, hot, versus kishka, earthquake. And then the sound eat, the sh sound, is different than the sh sound. So you have something like ish, very basic word for woman, and then something like kishto, to irrigate it. So the differences between sh and sh. Congo marks actors in a sentence differently than is the case in most European languages that you're probably familiar with, unless you're familiar with Basque. So in English, we say things, if, things are going well. Something like she kissed him, right? Him is in what we call the accusative case, and we know that because we can't say things like she kissed he. That sounds pretty bad in English, right? And we say she is in the nominative case because likewise we can't say things like her kissed him. That doesn't sound very good either. I hope we all agree on that. So note that she is the subject of a transitive verb, that is to say it takes an object, which is kiss in the sentence. She kissed him, right? She's doing the kissing, she's not being kissed, correct? Okay. Well, if she were the subject of an intransitive verb, that is to say it doesn't take an object, like sleep, the verb sleep, the pronoun would still be she, right? We wouldn't suddenly say her sleeps in English just because in this case she is the, a subject that has an intransitive verb, or the verb doesn't have an object. Okay, well, we have to turn everything on its head for the typical Mayan language, including Congo. So just to reinforce this idea, in languages like English, we see the following morphological, that is to say, word marking pattern. S, let's call the subject of an intransitive verb, like sleep. A is the subject of a transitive verb, like kiss. And O is the subject of a transitive verb. So in English, the morphological marking, the way we write the words, right, we would have both the subject of an intransitive verb, like sleep, and the subject of a transitive verb, like kiss. There's no difference between the 2 of them, right? We would call them the S and the A, we'll color them brown here, right, because they have the same morphological marking. They look the same. They're both she. Okay? The object now is the object, in this case, her, right? So her has a different morphological and phonological form. We write it differently, we say it differently, right? We know that they're very similar in meaning, but we know that there's a difference between she and her, right? Okay. Well, in languages like Congo, we see a very different morphological, that is to say, word marking pattern. So instead of having the S group with the A, it groups with the O, okay? So we would get subject of an intransitive verb like sleep is marked the same as the object of a transitive verb. So for example, the second person singular, for you, they're both marked as ach, okay? And the odd man out in this case is the A, the agentive verb. So this is kind of cool because what it means is that these languages organize their way of thinking about verbs and the subjects of verbs in a very different way. It's almost like there's kind of a gradient of how much of an agent you are, how much of an actor you are in a sentence. And the idea is that you are, as the object of a verb, right, and as the subject of an intransitive verb, you're kind of in the same category, right? So by analogy, well, we can just use a couple of labels now. We can say, well, let's say that English is something called a nominative accusative language because it patterns in this way. But Kawoq is what we call an ergative absolutive language, where S and O pattern against A. So we would say something like, Mashat shwai, you slept, or you have an intransitive verb and no object. And then to mark this second person singular, you, right? You ate an avocado. Notice that these are two different pronouns, right? Even though in English we would say you sleep and you eat an avocado, right? We wouldn't suddenly change things around. Absolute ergative systems can be challenging for nominative accusative learners. So if you're trying to learn a Mayan language, you might run into something like this, an error that I might think is kind of amusing, but I do it a lot. What you really want to say is something like, you lifted the table, mashallah imesha, right? Instead you use the wrong pronoun, and it switches everything around. You say, mashash latak imesha, you've used the ach, which is the object pronoun. So what it's really saying is, the table lifted you. Okay, and this all stems from the fact that in Kawoq, the agent is so the subject of a verb, when the verb is an active verb, when there's really something to be said, like you're eating an avocado, you're really doing something to something else, that's a certain kind of word pattern. But then if you are the object of a verb, right, so say somebody's kissing you, or you are just sleeping, right, you're not really doing anything to anybody else, those two things pattern together, right? Does that make sense? So it's not, there's not one that's better or worse than the other. There's no kind of value judgment. And there's not one that's more complicated than the other. But it's certainly a very interesting way in which languages tend to group together. And by the way, Mayan languages aren't exactly exotic because they have this kind of a system. There are lots and lots of other languages that have ergative absolute systems. It's just that we're not familiar with a lot of them because they don't happen to occur in Europe. Unless, again, as I said, you're familiar with Basque. Basque is a language that does this. And by the way, it doesn't mean that Basque is related to Mayan, just in case you're wondering. Okay, so I don't want to belabor the point too much, but I'll give a little plug for some of the work that we're doing. We're trying to develop an online dictionary of Kawoq. So this is a nice picture of Champaign, where Kawoq is spoken, one of the places it's spoken. And so if you're interested and you navigate, if you Google Kawoq documentation or Kawoq dictionary in the next few weeks, we'll have a searchable online dictionary of the language that's available. So if you are people in the community who work with Kawoq on occasion or run into them, maybe you'll be able to find out a little bit more about how to communicate with them easily. So thanks very much for your time.